welcome to this New Zealand Initiative webinar. My name is Oliver Hartwich, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all to the launch of our latest report. It's called Unscrambling Government, Less Confusion, More Efficiency by Roger Partridge and Jemma Stevenson. And for those of you who've been on our webinars before, you know the drill. We have the author or one of the co-authors with us. That's our chair and senior fellow, Roger Partridge. Hi, Roger.
Hello.
And we are also very fortunate to have the author of the foreword with us, and that's Murray Horn. And Murray needs little introduction as a former Treasury Secretary and former CEO of the ANZ Bank. And we're delighted to have you on the call today, but even more delighted, of course, to have your foreword. So hi, Murray.
Hi, Oliver. Glad to be here.
So proceedings, as always with our webinars when we launch reports, we will, of course, first hear from the report's author, that's Roger. He will have a presentation for about 10 minutes, then we'll get your comments on the report, Murray. And then afterwards, we'll have about 45 minutes or so for Q&A. And for those of you who've been with us before on these similar webinars, we're doing it exactly in the same standard format. We will use Slido, where you can all ask your questions and where you can also vote on everybody else's questions. It's very simple. You go to slido.com, you put in a code. The code for this one is 3528085. I will also share this in the chat. Please ask your questions, vote on everybody else's questions, and I'll put the most popular questions to Roger and Murray. But before we get to the Q&A, it's over to you, Roger. Congratulations on the report. It's a much needed report because it is the follow-up, of course, on our previous publication, Cabinet Congestion, the Rise of a Ministerial Maze. This is why I've got this ministerial maze behind me. But today the question is really, how do we get out of this maze? How do we make it a bit more manageable? This is what your report is all about. So please tell us about it, Roger.
All right. Thanks, Oliver. And thanks, everyone, for joining us. As some of you will know, I've spent the better part of a decade researching and writing about what you might call public sector plumbing, the nuts and bolts of how government institutions function. My main focus has been on regulatory agencies, but Herald readers will know I've been writing about wider public sector governance issues for many years, from problems with the 2020 Public Service Act to issues with public service neutrality, the size of the bureaucracy, moving beyond measures of spending to measuring outcomes, and most recently to the erosion of specialist expertise within the public service. And they are all important topics, and I mention them because they underscore how the recommendations in today's report are not a panacea. But it's also true that structure can shape outcomes. Governance arrangements in any organisation could determine whether problems get solved or simply shuffled between offices. They affect whether a government can move decisively on important issues like housing, education, or climate change, or whether good intentions get lost in a maze of overlapping responsibilities. As Oliver said, the work for this report began with our colleague Max Salmon asking a simple question early last year: just how complex is New Zealand's executive compared with other countries? The answer becomes clear when you compare us with peer nations. And this slide, assuming my screen sharing works, how's that, Oliver?
Works really well, thank you.
Is Norway's public policy responsibility flowchart. Norway has a population similar to ours. It has 20 ministers overseeing 20 portfolios across 17 ministries. Clean lines of accountability. Each ministry reports to a clearly identified minister. Each minister has a coherent domain. When a Norwegian citizen, mayor, or business leader has an issue, they know exactly which minister to contact and which minister is responsible. So now let me show you New Zealand's. Now this is quite different, as you can see, and it's a modified version of Max's flowchart mapping the relationships between our ministers' portfolios and departments. We've updated Max's diagram to reflect 3 additional portfolios that have been created just this year: Rail, South Island, and Vocational Education, plus a new Ministry of Regulation. And the flowchart now captures 81 ministerial portfolios and 43 government departments. The contrast with Norway is jarring. Lines crisscross everywhere. Multiple ministers connect to the same department. Multiple departments report to the same minister. What Norway achieves with elegant simplicity, New Zealand has turned into administrative spaghetti. Of course, the complexity did not emerge by design. It has developed gradually, and it accelerated under MMP. We've allowed portfolios to become political currency, and we've certainly inflated the number of them. Creating a new portfolio offered an easy solution to coalition negotiations. Rather than taking an entire portfolio away from a minister, just slice a bit off, rename it, and hand it over. The result is that today, we've got more than 3 times as many ministerial portfolios per capita as countries like Ireland, Norway, and Singapore, and nearly twice as many departments. And this complexity has real-world consequences. Take housing policy. It's a critical issue. It's currently touched on by as many as a dozen portfolios. The Minister of Housing oversees the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development. The Minister for Building and Construction manages regulatory functions through MB. The Minister for Local Government oversees councils that control zoning and planning. The Ministers for Environment and RMA reform control the environmental approvals. The Minister for Social Development handles housing support. The Minister for Infrastructure and Transport handles funding through Treasury. Now, in the current portfolio allocation, 4 of those portfolios are held by a single minister, Chris Bishop, but it hasn't always been like that. And when the good sense of allocating like portfolios to one person is shown by a particular government adopting that approach, it raises the question, why don't we consolidate them into coherent domains and make things less fragmented like other countries do? But the consequence with housing is that no single minister has both the responsibility and authority over the levers affecting the affordability crisis. Every reform step requires ministerial negotiation across multiple portfolios. Education's another case in point. We have 4 ministers of education, the education minister who looks after schools. We've got vocational education, universities, and charter schools. Finland and Singapore manage the entire education pipeline with a single minister, and that allows them to align curriculum, skills training, and tertiary education into a single coherent plan. MB, in contrast, is another different but equally problematic pattern. Rather than splitting a policy domain across multiple departments, MB represents the opposite extreme, a sprawling conglomerate of wildly different functions under one roof. MB employs 6,500 people across functions as diverse as immigration, labour law, small business policy, tourism, science and innovation, and energy regulation. The situation becomes absurd when you think that MB is accountable to 20 ministers. Each of those ministers has their own staff, their own priorities, their own political imperatives. And no one, I think, could possibly start with a diagram and say, I'm going to create an organisation with 20 masters. The administrative confusion carries real costs. International evidence suggests countries with more ministers tend to spend more money and run larger deficits, and our own fiscal trends support this story. Between 1997 and 2019, as ministerial numbers grew, so did Crown spending and the size of the deficit. The evidence from other small advanced OECD countries suggests New Zealand's executive complexity makes us an outlier. Ireland, with a population close to ours, operates with 15 cabinet ministers and 18 departments compared with our 40-odd. Indeed, the Irish constitution caps the cabinet size at 15. Each Irish minister holds undisputed responsibility for their domain, When housing becomes a political issue, everyone knows who to hold accountable. Studies of the Irish system find the ministerial cap forces prioritisation and delivers cohesion. And big ministerial workloads are dealt with not by slicing them up into a proliferation of portfolios, but by allowing cabinet ministers to delegate tasks to junior ministers called ministers of state. Norway, the diagram we saw, demonstrates how organisational clarity translates into effective governance, with 20 portfolios and 17 departments. Norwegian ministers can develop genuine expertise in their domains. Comparative governance research highlights Norway's small cabinet as promoting policy coherence, fiscal discipline, and effective coalition coordination. And Singapore, with a population similar to ours, operates with just 18 ministers and 16 ministries. And its discipline structure supports a whole of government approach that consistently ranks amongst the most effective in the world. Perhaps most illustrative for us is Australia's experience under Bob Hawke. In the 1980s, when Hawke came to power in 1983, Australia faced a cabinet structure that had grown to 28 ministers and 28 ministries, similar to, though less complex than ours. In 1987, Hawke moved decisively. He cut cabinet to 16 senior ministers. He dismantled misaligned structures, introduced the two-tier ministerial system with junior ministers reporting to senior budget-holding cabinet ministers, and consolidated government departments down to 18 as well. Critics predicted chaos. Instead, studies after the event showed the reforms delivered more coherent policy, faster decision-making, and cleaner and clearer accountability. Most tellingly, perhaps, the reforms endured the change of government. John Howard's coalition government retained Hawke's lean cabinet and departmental structure. The reforms survived because after the change of government, because they worked. Things have drifted off a bit. The Australian cabinet has grown in size over the last decade or so, but the much more focused set of portfolios and much more focused set of government departments has endured. So that brings us to the practical question, what could reform look like for New Zealand? Our report proposes two illustrative models for reform here. Neither is a blueprint. They're straw men or starting points for serious debate. And as Murray says in his foreword, there's room for quibbles. In fact, quibbles are welcome. But I would encourage people thinking about what we're recommending not to focus on the detail, but to focus on the big picture, the incoherence our current structure brings. So our two models, we put forward two models, the consolidation of ministerial portfolios from 81 down to 15 or 20 budget-holding cabinet ministers, supported by a second tier of junior ministers or ministers of state, and consolidation of our 43 departments to just 20. And if this works, here's the first of them. So the compact cabinet model would reduce portfolios to 15 senior cabinet ministers, supported by 10 junior ministers, although the number of junior ministers could flex in response to political need. There's no magic number in 10. Looking at some of the big changes, housing, infrastructure, local government and transport would be unified under one minister for the built environment, who would control all the levers really relevant to housing policy. A new Minister of Home Affairs would have responsibility for DIA's functions, excluding local government, plus immigration, communities, so our various people ministries, and culture and heritage. So all or most of the government's civic functions would be brought together in a ministry, in a Minister for Home Affairs. Education would be managed by a single minister. Justice, policing, and corrections would form one integrated law and justice portfolio. And as in the UK, Ireland, and Australia, junior ministers would play a crucial role. Cabinet ministers with big workloads could delegate specific responsibilities while retaining primary accountability for their entire portfolio. For example, the new Minister for the Built Environment might delegate responsibility for transport to a junior minister, or as in the UK, a new Home Affairs Minister might delegate the immigration function. The junior minister would help with political realities, especially under MMP. Coalition partners need ministerial positions, that's for sure. Backbench MPs need career paths. The junior minister's role solves these problems without creating the current confusion from portfolio fragmentation. And junior ministers would take bills through Parliament and represent the government in specialist areas, but they wouldn't hold budget responsibility. That would remain with senior cabinet ministers. The second model, the realigned portfolios model, is a slightly more moderate approach, consolidating the 81 portfolios to 20, with cabinet ministers with fewer junior ministers. It would see additional cabinet posts for regulation, the Attorney General, energy and resources, communities, and transport and infrastructure. And in each case, this important second step would be departmental consolidation, reducing the current 43 departments to approximately 20, as shown in the slide, which would create clearer alignment between political leadership and administrative execution. Each department would serve one master and pursue one coherent set of objectives. Both models deliberately carve up the sprawling conglomerate that is MB, rather than creating new conglomerates. So MB would be divided into a more focused Department of Commerce, with immigration moved to Home Affairs, and an energy and resources ministry separated from the commerce functions. Building products would move to housing. Both of our strawman models transform that spaghetti diagram into something resembling Norway's clean structure. And the visual transformation tells the story from complexity that confuses even experienced participants to simplicity that anyone can understand at a glance. Reform of this scale requires careful sequencing, and the report contains a chapter with an implementation pathway. The first, and in a way administratively easiest, is portfolio consolidation. And that can happen without any legislative change. That's within the hands of the Prime Minister, who, with his corporate background, the current Prime Minister, must surely understand the importance of clear accounting lines of accountability. So that could happen by ministerial warrant, perhaps immediately after an election. A second, Parliament would create the statutory junior minister role. And third, there would be departmental realignment, starting in phases with the obvious candidates and perhaps proceeding over 12 months or 24 months in stages coordinated by a central transition office within the DPMC. Each phase would build on the previous ones. Learnings would be translated into the next set of mergers, creating momentum while managing political and administrative risks. And independent agencies like Police and Stats.NZ would retain statutory autonomy, even if administratively housed in larger ministries, as occurs in countries like the UK, Australia, and Ireland. The goal is coherence, not centralisation for its own sake. Critics of what we've proposed will be tempted to dive into the detail, and there will doubtless be objections to whether this particular role best sits with that particular function. But the short point is that New Zealand's executive is too big, too fragmented, and too costly. Reform can sharpen accountability, improve coherence, and still meet political realities. Other countries have done it. The question is whether we will have the will to follow their lead. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Roger. And once again, congratulations on the report. We now have time to hear Murray's comments, but before we do that, just a reminder, you can ask your questions on Slido. I've shared the Slido code in the chat notes. It's 3528085. And after Murray, we will go into the Q&A and I will ask the most popular questions. But for now, Murray, can you tell us what you make of Roger's proposal?
Well, you can tell by my forward that I like it. And I just want to bring I want to bring the issue to life a bit with a real example that I had some exposure to. So in 2012, a colleague and I did a review of the Ministry of Justice, which includes courts, and the Department of Corrections. Another colleague did police. There was a lot of optimism at the time that a combination of favourable demographics and improved cooperation across agencies would result in a reduction in crime and imprisonment. In fact, the idea was you could reduce the prison population from about 10,000 to about 8,000, as long as police, justice, and corrections worked as one in managing the criminal justice pipeline. So you can imagine the criminal justice pipeline, people enter it, police arrest there's an offence, police arrest somebody, a portion of those goes to the courts, and a portion of those goes to goes to the prison. A portion of those come out and then reoffend. So, you know, there's a pipeline there you could imagine, and different departments manage different parts of it. So the police manage the beginning, justice manage the courts, corrections manage the prisons. Okay, so the idea was that if those three could work as one in managing the pipeline, we'd shift the emphasis from just managing demand and managing increasing demand to reducing demand through more effective prevention and rehabilitation. That was the big idea. In short, we could create a virtuous cycle: less crime, less prosecutions through the courts, fewer prisoners, less offending, and so it goes on. The government was quite taken with this, agreed to a fixed baseline of spending across the three agencies, so they were assured that if they could make savings, they could reinvest it somewhere else in the pipeline. The agencies they established a leadership board of the three CEOs and produced a combined 4-year budget plan. So you could say, okay, this is in many ways the counterfactual, that do you really need to bang all these things together into a single Ministry of Justice and Law, or would this sort of thing work? Well, just think about the incentives. Each of these agencies can make a legitimate claim to influence the quantum of offending and reoffending, and each has a strong incentive to defend their budget and prove that what they were doing is particularly important. So, you know, police, stop people going into the pipeline at the beginning; corrections, stop reoffending; courts, smooth, faster courts, less remand prisoners, and so on. So let's look at the incentives. So if you're a minister, you're largely judged on your performance in your portfolio. So, for example, the Minister of Corrections and his chief executive, and chief executives really want to please they have their own objectives, sure, but they really want to please their portfolio minister. That's their primary client, I suppose you could call it. So the minister and the chief executive of corrections want to demonstrate that they are able to reduce reoffending. That's what's going to get the minister a bigger portfolio. That's what's going to get the chief executive a good positive relationship with his minister and a good reputation in terms of the next job that he wants. So imagine that you're the minister or the chief executive of corrections being asked to agree that resources should be shifted to police in order to support their prevention efforts. How willing are you to see that as being more effective than your present prison rehabilitation programs over which you've got control? So you're being asked to give up some money over a program that you think is pretty important, is certainly important to you, and you can control that program, and you're asked to give it to police. Besides, you've got the sort of nagging suspicion that at least some of the money that goes to police will end up being used to settle a police pay round. After all, money's fungible, so money that police might have used for prevention can be used to settle pay claims if extra money for prevention is now available from corrections. So the corrections guys are sitting there going, okay, so we've got to give up some money. We've got to less like to achieve what's important to us. In order to give some money to police to fund extension of their prevention program, I've got no control over whether or not that's going to be any good. And I've even got no control over whether or not the money's really going to go to that program. So at the end of the day, the chief executive and the minister have little incentive to agree to reallocate their money. And because of that, it's unlikely to happen. And even if there's new money available, they'll fight like cats and dogs for it to go to their particular area. So having a single minister and chief executive responsible for delivering a reduction in the incidence and severity of crime, which is what we're all in this game should be the overall objective, that having a single minister and a chief executive responsible for that is far more likely to see resources allocated to those interventions that are most effective at delivering those results, no matter where they sit across that criminal justice pipeline. So that's why I think that the current, you just can't get there by urging greater cooperation and hand-holding across the existing portfolios, because the ministers don't have an incentive to do it, and the chief executives don't have an incentive to do it. They might all, might think it's a good idea. And in this case, I was a bit involved in it. That three chief executives thought it was a good idea, to try and cooperate around this sort of thing. But at the end of the day, when push comes to shove, they just don't have the incentive to make the hard choices. So the only way to get around that is to have a minister and a chief executive responsible for the whole lot. So they've got the incentive then to put the money where it matters most. There we go, Oliver. That's my real world take on this.
Well, thank you very much, Murray, and thanks again, Roger. Let's now go into the Q&A, and I will ask the most popular question we currently have. How do you overcome the MMP need for preferment to keep all parties and their restless MPs happy? Roger.
Well, the short point is you don't need to have fewer ministers than we've currently got. We've currently got 28. We've said either 15 plus 10 junior ministers, that's 25, or 20 plus 5 junior ministers, also 25, but you could have a greater number of junior ministers. So there'll be just as many ministerial positions available. We'll just consolidate the 81 portfolios. And so I think you can absolutely deal with the coalition issues by having these senior budget holding cabinet ministers and ministers of state, as do Australia, Ireland, and the UK. So I think that problem is solved by junior ministers. And the good thing is you're not creating junior ministers for that purpose. You're creating junior ministers because it will help the system run smoothly and ease the burden of the senior budget holding cabinet ministers. So I don't think MMP is an obstacle at all.
That's great. Thank you very much for the concise answer. Should say we have more than 200 people on the call and we already have 26 questions lodged, and please keep them coming. So let's try to get through quite a few of them. The next one actually probably doesn't have too much to do with the report itself, but somebody asks, what's the optimum number of MPs and ministers for a country of our size? I mean, ministers you talk about, but what about MPs?
I don't have a short answer to that. Well, perhaps I do. I don't think we've got too many ministers, too many MPs. As for the number of ministers, I think the big issue is how many budget holding cabinet ministers you have. And there it's somewhere between 15 and 20. I think we've got our cabinet size not too bad. It's just that we've sliced up all the portfolios so that you get ministers that are expected to be jacks of all trade, and the risk is they become masters of none. So you've got a senior cabinet minister, very able in Judith Collins, but she's expected to be in charge of defence, space, the public service, the Attorney General, digitising government. So we've got these fruit salad portfolio allocations. What we should do is collect like with like, and have a minister that develops deep expertise in that area.
Okay. Murray, any thoughts?
Yeah, if you think about ministers that develop deep expertise, there was a Minister of Revenue. He was minister. He was MP for Ohio. God, his name escapes me now.
It was
But he
Peter
was
Dunn.
a minister. He was a Minister of Revenue for a long period of time, and developed real expertise in that area. And I think that the revenue portfolio and the whole revenue system benefited a hell of a lot from having Peter Dunn as Minister of Revenue for a long period of time, able to develop that expertise. So if I was to take one example of a minister that could be on in tax, I mean, it's a lot of detail. There's a lot of it changes all the time, so you can be quickly out of date on the detail. But I think Peter Dunn's an excellent example of someone who got on top of the detail, and was a real advantage to have in that portfolio.
Okay. The next question is a technical one about the report, Roger. How would this picture, and that's a spaghetti diagram or the reformed spaghetti diagram, change if you change the order of departments or portfolios? Would it be as messy as it looks now?
If you change the order, it would be messier. So we've optimized it. We were conscious that there was feedback after Max's report that it was possible to rearrange the portfolios or the departments in a different order and to make it less complicated. So we've made it as uncomplicated as possible. If we had reproduced Max's diagram, it would have been what looks shocking would have been even worse.
Next question is then about Ireland as a comparison. How does Ireland compare at the local government level? And is this part of the overall picture of governance complexity?
I don't think so. Most countries are a bit more devolved than New Zealand. We're one of the most centralized countries in the world. We looked at the devolution issue and decided it didn't really complicate the picture, because the problem is fragmentation. We haven't always been fragmented. We don't need to be fragmented, and you can't explain the fragmentation by reference to devolution.
And actually, from memory, I think Ireland's pretty centralized as well.
Yeah.
Okay. Any comment on the practical, political, and legal difficulties of closing government institutions and portfolios? Maybe Murray, for you.
Well, in terms of the portfolios, they're the gift of the Prime Minister. So I wouldn't have thought that was particularly difficult at all. If a Prime Minister, incoming Prime Minister, you'd probably have to do it after an election. So, you wouldn't want to take, between elections. So an incoming Prime Minister who was who wanted to achieve the goals that Roger set out on this report, and decided that he or she can decide those portfolios and the portfolio allocations right at the beginning. Simple as. And I think it's important that happens first. I mean, you can't generate coherence from below unless you've got a coherent set of ministers. The departments are going to be all over the place. So you've got to do that first, and I think that's a pretty simple thing to do. The departmental reorganisation is always, you might need some, you do need some legislation for the junior minister thing. That could be, reasonably speedy. The departmental organisation is always a hassle. You got people worried about where they're going to sit and where they're going to get a car park and a corner office and all that sort of mumbo jumbo. So you don't want them to take their eye off the ball for very long. So my view is you want to get it pretty clear where you're going, and you want to be pretty quick about it. But that's my view. But yeah. Roger's more.
Look, I agree with that. Portfolio consolidation can happen so long as there's political will. That's all that's needed, and that's not huge. Shouldn't be hugely disruptive, especially if you end up with 20 cabinet ministers and 8 junior ministers, or 10 junior ministers, to take account for the fact that we've got a couple of undersecretaries at the moment. And you might not call them junior ministers. Most countries seem to call their junior ministers ministers of state. So you have a Minister of State for Trade. On the departmental consolidation, much more complicated, and you'd pick a few logical groups to start with, and you would learn from it. You'd run a transition team out of DPMC. you'd do a few at once. There'd be some, we've got a list in the report of what we think the legislative changes might need to be, certainly in relation to specific functions like police, that need to be some tweaks to the relevant legislation. But you might say, well, we're going to wrap up justice and law together for the reasons that Murray said, so that we can take a holistic view of where we're best to spend the marginal dollar in that space. And so you'd have one Minister of Justice and Law and one department. And then you might take a year and say, okay, did that work? Did we achieve anything? So it might not all be done. We've said up to 24 months, but it might not all be done in one term. You certainly don't want to disrupt every department in Wellington all at once.
What relationship do you see between the comparatively high number of ministries and departments and New Zealand's wider issue of productivity? Murray.
Well, I'll make 2 points. First point is the government is now such a big part of the economy that productivity in government and the provision of public services is important in terms of overall productivity. If you don't have coherence at the top, you're not going to get productivity. You're not going to get much productivity. You're going to get what we've got, which is a lot of extra spending and very little traction on the results. So, you know, productivity there, I think, depends a lot on getting far more coherence at the top, and this would deliver that. In terms of the across the private sector, well, this comes down to the government's ability to generate a environment which is reasonably predictable, and where you know, unnecessary regulation is just stripped out of the system, and the government focuses on doing its job well. I mean, it's got a very important part to play in an economy. It's got, you know, protecting property rights and all of that. And so let's focus the government on doing its job well, and then providing an environment where the private sector knows what it's doing, knows what the government's going to be doing, and can get on with it. So I really think that this is an important part of the productivity problem.
There's another question that is more like a comment, and someone who says there has also been a huge growth in Crown entities, commissioners, other agencies, ombudsmen, and so on. So it's not just about departments or ministries, it's more than that, but that would probably require another report, Roger.
Yes, no, it's absolutely more than that. We've got a plethora of Crown entities and other agencies, so it's more than departments. Absolutely true.
But you would start with the departments and then hopefully reorganize the rest later.
Yes, I'd start with the portfolios, but yes.
Yeah. Okay. Comment from Janelle: outstanding work, but how could this plan be presented to the public in a better way than perhaps was done with the New Zealand flag? Cross-party support would be even better. How do we achieve this, and how do we get the public excited about this? Because some people might say, oh, it's just a beltway issue. It's something that matters only to people in Wellington.
Yeah, well, it's never going to be as important an issue to ordinary voters as the state of the economy and whether they've got a well-paid job and can afford to do their grocery shopping. And it's probably not going to be as at the top of the list like education or health. But I think it has general voter appeal, streamlining the executive structure. Most people will understand the importance of that. And from our consultations, I think simplification and streamlining will have cross-party support. We consulted widely with former prime ministers from both sides of the political divide, with former cabinet ministers, with former senior civil servants, and everybody said, without exception, everybody said this has to be ironed out. So I think there's no other issue in the public sector that I've ever come across where there's been unanimous support for what we were looking at.
And the issue certainly passed the Mike Hosking test. So you were on Hosking this morning and he was supportive.
Yeah, I'm not sure that that's the most challenging threshold for reforming government, but I've had several very deep conversations with political leaders outside of the government who agree that something needs to be done.
Okay. Next question is, would a different electoral system help? Any thoughts on that, either Roger or Murray?
I think I'll chip in. I think there's no doubt that MMP has accelerated the fragmentation of portfolios. It's just been too easy. This particular person in the coalition negotiations is interested in this particular small issue, so let's create a portfolio for it. And what this report is designed to do is to say, well, hang on a moment, let's just step back and look at what the consequences of that are. So I think there's no doubt MMP's complicated it.
But to be fair, I mean, it started in the 1950s already.
That's true. It's accelerated after MMP, the portfolio splitting. But Ireland and Norway both are countries with long traditions of coalition governments. So it doesn't have to be the way it is.
Okay. Next question. Beyond direct Crown costs, how would you quantify the wider economic impact and the costs of portfolio proliferation? Could you track improvement over time? That's a question for an economist, Murray.
Well, in my mind, you would track the improvement in results delivered by the government. So if you take my example, you'd have to you'd be looking at improvements in reductions in both the incidence and severity of crime. You know, that's the ultimate measure. That's really what you're looking for here. So, and I do that across the other areas of government as well. So, you know, what are the big results that we want? And you track those. So if you look at the incidence and severity of crime, yeah, so the incidence has been going down, my understanding. I think the severity has been going up. But look, it's that's the way I would judge whether or not this was successful. The results that are being delivered by the public sector.
And the next question blends straight into that. It says every restructuring is disruptive, and that's of course true. What would the short-term costs look like, and how do they compare with the long-term benefits? Or if I rephrase this, how long do you think we'd need to wait after restructure until we actually see the results?
Well, Roger's report does go into discusses a transition which aims to learn by doing and reduce those, you know, minimize those restructuring costs. But there's no avoiding it. You know, as soon as you start a restructuring, people are worried about whether they've got a job, where they sit, who reports to who, you know, whether they've got a car park, whether they've got which office they're going, blah, 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 blah. And all those things on your mind distract you from doing what you're paid to do. So, you know, it is costly. There's no getting around from that. I mean, my instinct's always to go harder, faster, but I could see that you know, you wouldn't want to do that across the whole estate. So, you know, I'd pick something, do it, pick another one, do it probably. But it's at some point it'll have to, you know, momentum will build up. People where you're not doing things are worried about where they're going, and you're probably better off just to do it. But Roger's given this a bit more thought in terms of this particular application.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure that I can improve on that answer. I'd go hard on portfolio consolidation, do it all at once, get it down to either 15 or 20. And I think there will be big wins from that, because the most telling quote from anybody we consulted with was from one former Prime Minister who said, if your reform agenda requires 6 ministers, that's 6 opportunities for either them or their officials' own priorities to get in the way. So I think you would expect faster decision-making and less transactions costs around decision-making from compressing the portfolios. On departmental consolidation, my instincts are to phase it and to learn and to measure. And so take 2 or 3 areas, consolidate them, and learn from what's been done, and assess whether it's produced the outcomes you want.
Okay. Next question is probably a question for a lawyer. Could we do a cap of ministers like Ireland, and how hard would it be to reduce our size if not? I mean, the question is really, Ireland has a constitution. We don't have a written constitution. It would be much harder to legislate for that, right?
No, we could legislate for it. We could put it in the Constitution Act. It wouldn't be too hard for it effectively to have constitutional status. So you could entrench it, and as we do with some of our other constitutional provisions, changes to the electoral system and the like. So you could do that. That might help make it more, it certainly would make it more enduring. You'd build support for it across the political divide to get it through. So we could do that.
It's really hard to bind future parliaments, though, isn't it?
It is, but we do that in other like areas. Not binding absolutely, but there are conventions.
Would you like to see that?
I don't. Well, yeah. I can see arguments both ways.
Okay, well, let's leave it at that.
Yeah, I thought economists were like that. I didn't know lawyers were like that as well.
No, absolutely.
I've come across that. I've seen it before.
Yeah.
How feasible and practical is your proposal? Do you think New Zealand would be ready for such a change without bipartisan support?
I think if it's going to be enduring, you'd want to have brought the opposition along with it. Maybe that's not necessary for portfolio consolidation. I think we'd be surprised about how much willingness there would be on both sides of the House for this sort of reform. It's a no-brainer when you look at how dysfunctional our organisational arrangements are.
And by the way, we did launch our previous report with Stuart Nash, and from that sort of politics, basically it was the same kind of story. Yeah, the system doesn't work and we have to change it. So it doesn't seem to be an issue where there is a lack of bipartisan understanding that something's not quite right.
Yeah.
Okay, the next question is more common. It sounds like this change will benefit cabinet process, but not necessarily the public experience. What do you think?
No, well, I think this is all about outcomes for the public. If there's one feature of government, it's slow progress on dealing with the big public policy challenges: affordable housing, a healthcare system that meets the needs of New Zealanders, an education system that meets the needs of New Zealanders. If we can make the machinery of government more coherent, that will help with getting better outcomes. Of course, like any governance arrangements, whether it's in the public sector or the private sector, no amount of good governance will make up for people that make poor decisions. But all things being equal, better governance arrangements will lead to quicker decision-making and more accountability.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it makes making the right thing easier. Makes doing the right thing easier, right?
Yeah.
So that's why it's attractive.
Great. Next question is a historical one. How has New Zealand ended up with all these portfolios and departments in the first place?
We've always had a lot of, sort of going back to the beginning of the 20th century, or the middle of early in the first half of the 20th century, we've always had a lot of government departments from the 1920s onwards, more than other countries, differently framed. Ministry of Forestry, or what was it? Forestry Corporation. Well, it became Forestry Corporation. So we've always had a lot of government. We've always had a big central government and a lot of government departments. The portfolio proliferation is relatively new, and it really accelerated out of control with the advent of MMP.
Okay. The intuition behind the population-based ministries are that they are standalone based on unique needs So how might a ministry for communities, so various communities, retain this?
What you'd hope to see is divisions within the ministry dealing with specific needs of particular communities, and then some common features, policy expertise, and then back office functions. So that's not too much different from many other organisations where there are specific functions within one organisation.
Okay. Next question I would like to put to you, Mari. Where are the biggest hurdles to simplifying the executive? Is it with the public service or with the politicians? And how are these hurdles best overcome? So in other words, do you think politicians will fight this if it's a reform proposal? Or do you think the public service would like to keep things as they are?
Well, as long as if you're starting after an election, what the politicians, what the ministers have, what the incoming government has, is all sort of up in the air. So the loss aversion for them is much weaker. They're not that it's not as if they've got something, they're going to lose it, right? We're talking about the allocation of portfolios. For the public service, yeah, the loss aversion will kick in. So, you've got, I'm head of this, I'm head of that, I'm head of something else. I've got my own budget, I've got my own, people, all that sort of thing. Your loss aversion there is going to be far more marked. So I think you're going to get more resistance from them, and you're also going to get far more avenues for justifying that resistance. We're doing this, we're doing that, we're in the middle of this, you haven't given us time to see this work, blah, 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 blah. And, officials have got 101 ways of slowing something up if they really want to. So I think the official resistance will be the more telling, the more difficult to address. Yeah.
So that would be a yes minister style minister. It's a very courageous idea thing.
Yeah. Well, and you've got how many departments at the moment, Roger? How many departments have we got at the moment?
43.
Yeah, so 43 down to 20. So you've got 23 people that have got loss that they're going to face. And some of the current 43 are going to be head of bigger departments. Look, the history of the world is that gains are valued less than losses. So, the people who are going to gain are going to speak up less than the people who are going to lose.
Okay. I think we might ignore the next comment. Someone says it's just rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. I think that's very unfair to New Zealand, so we won't ask that.
No, but hold on, Oliver. Look, I think what I tried to do with my example is show that it's not rearranging deck chairs, and it really does matter. And you can't configure the current arrangements around the problem. That's really the essence of what I was trying to say.
No, I don't disagree at all with you, Murray, but I was disagreeing that it's the Titanic. It's not the Titanic. We're not talking about the Titanic. This can be saved, this ship.
Yeah, fair enough.
Okay, so next question then. How do overlapping ministerial responsibilities affect accountability? Maybe the best example there is MB, right?
Yes, although MB's is an amalgam of separate functions. Overlapping responsibilities, well, who's accountable? Who has carriage of this? And if you've got one minister who's accountable for these outcomes, that's where the buck stops. If there's 5 or 6, the accountability can be shuffled between them.
Okay, let's take another one. Good idea to consolidate, but this messy pattern will soon be replicated without reform to the process of selection and training of public servants. That's an altogether different problem, but do you agree? I
think there is a separate problem in the public service with a loss of expertise. But I think that's different from this exercise. This exercise is partly that we've got too many separate ministries with their own agendas, and Murray's Justice and Law example is a perfect one. And then we've been a little bit careless with how we've sliced and diced our cabinet roles, ministerial positions.
Okay. I'm almost tempted to answer the next question myself because I come from another MMP country, but someone says here, you link complexity to MMP. If you were to simplify departments, portfolios, and ministers, how would you propose solving the coalition negotiation problem? Roger.
I don't think portfolios are generally the first issue in coalition discussions. From what I gather, they normally focus on what the government's going to do. And if you look at the minor parties in the current government, they don't have particularly big roles. None of them are in charge of the Ministry of Health or the Ministry of Education or Minister of Finance. So I think if anything, condensing the roles down to a smaller number will lead to more meaningful roles for minor parties, and doubtless most closely associated with the political interests of their party.
And that would have been exactly my answer, because I think you can see this in especially European countries with proportional representation systems. The minor parties actually carve out quite important super ministries for themselves, whereas under our system, they would be spread more thinly.
Yes, and both Ireland and Norway, amongst the countries that we studied and have case studies in the report on, both of them have a long history of coalition arrangements. And if you look at the content of the coalition agreements, they're very, very detailed. They can extend to hundreds of pages.
Okay.
There's a long history with them, but they very largely focus on what the agenda of the government's going to be.
Okay. Next question then. How can we make government more effective by halving it when the current agencies cannot cope with demand?
Well, this is not about reducing the head count. It's about making the organizational structure more coherent.
There's another question actually about entrenching things. Someone says Labour traditionally expands the public service. Certainly happened last time around. How can we protect complex and costly reforms from being reversed? Can they be entrenched in legislation?
They could be, but I think there's the current government's likely to find a pretty high degree of political willingness. Labour in particular has generally always been interested in the machinery of government, and it will be obvious to Labour that we've got problems.
Okay. Final question, probably, we'll see how quick we get through that. Thoughts on process for change, portfolios first, you already said that, then departments to follow, and how to fix the political incentives for the, in inverted commas, dumb stuff, like, the things that come with ministerial portfolios, the driver, the car, and so on.
Well, that's a different question. It's one of the ones that I flagged at the outset. One of the big issues for us is accountability mechanisms for the public service generally. It's always struck me as odd that the big reporting day for the government is not what it's achieved, it's how much it's going to spend. So the big reporting day for the government is the budget. Whereas if you think about in the private sector, the big reporting day is how we went. And so we need to have a much better set of measurements for public sector outcomes.
Okay. Final question then is from me. How do you expect this discussion to continue? We had some thoughts already out of the ACT Party saying that they are interested in this. The Prime Minister is not that clear, but in the meantime, we've got Sir Brian Roche and the Public Service Commission actually preparing for some department consolidation. So what's your forecast? How do you think this will play out before the next election, Murray?
Well, in terms of portfolio consolidation, it all depends on the incoming Prime Minister, doesn't it? I mean, they're the ones that they're the ones that determine the portfolio size and allocation. So I think any incoming Prime Minister would be a hell of a lot happier if there was bipartisan support for it.
So you wouldn't expect anything to happen before the next election?
I wouldn't know, because you've got to, I couldn't imagine a reorganization of, the sort of reorganization of portfolios we're talking about before the election. No.
No.
It does sound like we're going to hear something about departmental consolidation from them before the election.
Okay. In which case, we will watch this space with interest. But for now, that's all we have time for today. Thank you again, Roger, for your report. And Jemma, Stevenson, of course, your co-author. Thank you, Murray, for the foreword. Thank you both for the discussion. And to all of you, thanks for watching. If you're interested in the report, Unscrambling Government, and here it is again, you can find it on our website at www.nzinitiative.org.nz. But for now, that's all. Thank you very much. And I look forward to seeing you at our next webinar.